Hi, thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be taking a look at trigger campaigns and how to build out a trigger nurture campaign. To begin with, trigger emails are a type of email campaign that, structurally speaking, are no different than an email blast or a drip marketing campaign. The primary difference is the delivery, timing, and specificity of content. Trigger emails are, as the name suggested, triggered or sent to an individual in response to an action or event occurring. They can be as simple as an autoresponder email or as complex as a multi-step email communication with personalized content. In this training, we will be walking through the structure of creating a trigger campaign and follow-ups. To begin with, trigger campaigns will always have what we call an initial trigger. With an initial trigger, that is the very first touch that will go out once the action or event occurs. So I'm going to select New, and we're going to go ahead and give it a campaign name. I'm going to call this today's date, so we'll put in 07/30/12 and training. I'm also going to put initial at the end of it so I know which one it is. Subject line can be anything that you want. I'm simply going to type in, thank you for your interest. With trigger campaigns, you want to set the from, the sender, and the display name, if those will be changing. However, you do not change the date and time. The date and time is pretty much null and void because, again, this will go out when the action or event occurs. If this is tied to a form, upon submission of the form, the person would receive the trigger. If I complete it right now at 1:04 p.m. Mountain, then I would receive it right now. If another person completes it tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern, then they would receive it at 8 a.m. Eastern. You'll see that we have some of the same options that we have in a normal email campaign or drip campaign, but we also have some additional information down here at the bottom, such as trigger active. Obviously, it has to be active for the trigger to go out. Instant release. This is only an option on the initial trigger, and what it's asking you is, as soon as the action or event occurs, do you want the campaign to go out? Sometimes it's yes, and sometimes it's no. If you do uncheck this, you will need to enter a number of days that the system is to wait, and then also a time that the person is allowed to deliver it. We also have the ability to say, do you want to allow duplicates? This is the only area in our system where you can allow a person to receive an email more than once if the action or event is completed more than once. We also have throttle days, which is similar to the email throttle to prevent oversaturation. And we also have a send notification that if you put in an email address here, a notification will go out to the person or people, letting them know that the person has been added to the trigger. Now, exclusion rules. Obviously, this is where you can choose to exclude particular lists or individuals from receiving your trigger. The trigger list area is more of a monitoring tab. So as people get entered into this particular trigger, you're going to be able to come here, watch and see that they've been entered, and then see the send date and time it's due to go out, and the status, and whether they opened or clicked. So it's a good reference area. We're then going to hop over to our email HTML, and I'm simply going to choose a template that we have already existing. Once you have your HTML done, you would, of course, go to the email text and convert the HTML into basic text. That's so that people who do not support HTML still receive at least an email. And then, of course, you go through the process of testing it, making sure everything looks good, making any modifications. And once you are done, you simply hit Save and Return. This is the very first touch in what is going to be our Trigger Nurture campaign. What we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and create what we call a Trigger Follow-up. A trigger follow-up is something that will go out after the person has received the initial trigger, and it is set by a relative number of days. 2 days after they receive the initial, 3 days after they receive the initial, 10 days after they receive the initial. The reason we have it set by relative numbers of days is simply because everybody will receive it at a different date and time. Again, I may receive it today, Bobby Joe may receive it on Friday, and then you got Susie who may receive it next week. The trigger follow-ups will stay true to when the person actually receives it. So we're going to go down to our third panel to where it says Trigger Campaigns Autoresponders. You don't want the follow-up campaign specific date to specific group. And the reason, again, for that is because it's looking for September 1st and August 22nd. It's looking for an absolute date. So here I'm going to go ahead and select New. And we're going to go ahead and give it another trigger name. So I'm going to call this again today's date. We'll put in training, but this time I'm going to put in follow-up 1. Okay? I could then put in a subject line, and if I scroll down, you can see that instant release is grayed out. The reason instant release is grayed out is because this is not an initial trigger. It is a follow-up. So it can't go out on instant release. It has to have a set number of days. So I'm going to say 3. And then, of course, you choose the date and time. We'll say 2 p.m. You'd go through the process. If there's any exclusion rules, add in your content here. I'm going to add in a template again. Convert your text, test it, and if everything looks great, then you hit Save and Return. We're going to do another one. The point of doing a trigger nurture is so that you are able to come in and have the person entered into a nurture campaign automatically. They immediately do an action. They get dropped into a nurture. Gives them more opportunities to engage with you, engage with your marketing activities, and get that score higher to get qualified as a lead. Once that's done, they get dropped into a follow-up. Again, you're just creating this relationship, trying to nurture this relationship with these people. I will go ahead and select New again under the Trigger Campaign Autoresponders. I'm going to give it another campaign name. I'm going to keep it very similar. Again, this will be helpful for you as you are creating custom reports or looking at the email sent inside of the contact lead record. We'll just put that in there and do a 2 again. Now here, if I wanted this to go out 3 days after the first follow-up, I would have to put a 6 here. It's not going to be 3, 3, 3. It would be 3, 6, 9, 12, so on, so on, so on. The number of days is always going to be set from the time that they received the initial trigger, not from the campaign prior to it. I'll explain that a little bit more in just a moment. Let's just pick another template in here. Again, you go through the same process of adding the HTML, converting the text, and of course, testing your campaign. So if we start to look at what we have set up here, you can see we have our initial trigger. Something is going to trigger this, which we haven't set up just yet, but we will. Once the person gets enrolled in this one, 3 days later, they're going to receive the follow-up number 1. And then 6 days after they receive the initial, they're going to receive follow-up number 2. So these are still technically 3 days apart. I have some customers who think it's a great idea to send a campaign every day, and I would not recommend doing that. You need to give people time to open and engage with your emails, and if you send them an email every single day, you're going to have a higher rate of unsubscribe. So space it out. Give them just at least a few days to go through the email, take action on it or not take action on it, and forget about it before you give them something else. So again, most of the time, this is always tied into an action or event. So I can continue doing this as much or as long as I want to. I do have one customer who has set it up for an entire year. They've set it up to say, okay, well, on insert of a new lead, guess what? We're going to drop them here. Then 30 days later, they're going to get another email. 30 days after that, they're going to get another one, and they continue in that manner for 12 cycles. I'm not saying that's what you need to do. It's just great to have in the back of your mind that might spark some ideas that might be relevant for your company. Let's go ahead and show you how to tie in the trigger nurture. To do that, I'm going to tie it into a dialogue. So I'm going to come over to my dialogues. I'm going to go to my wizard, and we're going to quickly walk through our 5-step process for creating a dialogue. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. As you know, I like having dates in here. So we'll do training, call to action. Organization, where do I want the type? Where do I want the folder to exist? More in-depth description if I choose to. Click on next. We have all of our options that we can choose from here. I'm going to just do a quick basic info one. Click on Next. You can choose your template. I'm going to go ahead and just choose this template. We'll choose that one. Set your theme. And then where's the person going to go upon submit? This is the important part. This is where I tie in my trigger email. I'm going to say, yes, I do want the person to receive a trigger email when they submit this form. And then I'm going to find my form. This is my one that I just created. This is why unique names are incredibly important. 073012, training initial. I know that's the one that I did. And we'll say, go to my website. Whoops. We'll just send them to salesfusion.com. When I click on Finish, that's pretty much all I have to do. Now I'm going to go ahead and test it out, and I'm going to show you how this all works together with those 3 triggers that we just created. I'm going to click here to launch the dialog. It's going to open up my form. I'm going to go ahead and fill out the information. So I'm going to put in my first name, my last name, and my email address. And I'm going to hit Submit. That's going to take me to my website, which is great. Oh, valid corporate email. My apologies. Let's put in 360.com. And that will take me to our website. And that tells me that I have completed the form, and now I should be getting dropped into that trigger email. Now, a lot of times I have people ask me, well, I created an initial trigger, and then I created 10 follow-ups. Do I have to wait until I receive all 10 to know that it's working properly? Absolutely not. You can see that your follow-ups are working properly simply by going in and looking at the trigger list. If I go back to my marketing tab, let me hit Save and Return here, and I open up the one that I just created. Oops, let me go back to my triggers. Okay, there's my initial trigger. So here's my first one. By completing that dialog, I should have been dropped into this particular email. If I go to Trigger List, there I am, jamie.whited@salesfusion360.com. Says send date and time as today at 3:13 p.m. Eastern, and my status is -1, which means it's in the encoding queue. How do I know what that means? We have our status key down here. Now, the follow-ups. So I know that I'm going to receive this one in just a moment. If I hit Save and Return and I go into my very first follow-up, even though it's due to go 3 days later, I should already be enrolled in this particular trigger. If I go to Trigger List here and I scroll down, there I am, jamie.whited@salesfusion360.com. I am due to receive this email on August 2nd at 2 p.m. I will stay in a status of -1, which is encoding, until it's time for the campaign to go out. If I hit Save and Return and I go into my second follow-up, you'll see that I've been entered into this trigger campaign as well. And instead of August 2nd, it's showing August 5th at 1 p.m. Status, -1 until that date and time comes. So you don't have to wait till August 5th to know that this is working properly. You can see it simply by going into these follow-up triggers and seeing that I'm already in the queue. It's a very easy way to test when you have a lot of trigger nurtures. One thing that goes along with the trigger nurtures is occasionally you aren't going to know when somebody's going to receive that initial trigger. So let's say that I complete the dialogue on a Wednesday, and I receive my initial trigger on a Wednesday. Well, the system's supposed to wait 3 days before it sends out the next one. If that's the case, then I'm going to receive it on a Saturday, which we all know is not optimal, especially when you're trying to get to business to business. Even if it's a consumer, people are busy doing things on the weekend. So you can tell the system to bypass a Saturday and or a Sunday and deliver it on Monday. How do you do that? You come to the triggers here, and down at the bottom, you'll see Trigger Calendar. When I click on Trigger Calendar, by default, we have Do Not Send on Saturdays and Do Not Send on Sundays checked. You can also add an individual day, so I can come in here and I can say Labor Day, I can choose that date, which is September 3rd, choose the end date, which again is September 3rd, and then hit save. So if somebody were to receive a follow-up trigger or scheduled to receive a follow-up trigger on that date, they will not receive it, and it will be pushed until the very next day. Trigger nurtures can be used in many, many different ways. They are meant to help you automate some of these items instead of having to have your sales team drop people into nurture campaigns or have to remember to send it to them, let's say, every week or every day. We all know that sometimes it gets a little hard with reminding people to do items like that. Some of the best practices that we have for triggers are to make sure your triggers are content specific, meaning that if somebody fills out a form for a white paper, that the follow-up is not going to be, oh yeah, would you like to see a demo? That might be something later down the road, but it's not relevant to the action that just occurred. Maybe saying something along the lines of, thank you for your interest in white paper 123. Here's another white paper I thought you might be interested in. Again, keeping it relevant. If you have great content delivered at the right time to the right person, then you're more likely to get better open and click-through rates. Use personalization in trigger emails. Common available personalization fields such as name, company, location, and vertical. Try to combine 2 to 3 of these personalization fields to give a strong perception that you know who they are and what they are interested in. When triggering emails, be very cautious about timing. As I mentioned before, sending trigger emails immediately post-action can sometimes turn people off, and sending too many too close together can also raise your unsubscribe rates. Create a content map for each trigger campaign. This will make sure you know what content is being sent out to avoid duplicating the content or the message in different triggers. I'm going to show you an example of what I like to do before I create or I help a customer create an advanced nurture campaign. Here we're going to look at an example of a flow chart of how this could actually work. So let's look at the top here. So our action or our event that is going to occur is new leads campaign. The call to action inside is going to be a dialogue asking for product interest. When somebody completes that form, we're going to look at what product they chose as the interest, and we're going to put them in a vertical based on it. They choose product A, they're going to receive a product A trigger 2 days after completion of the form. If they choose product B, they're going to receive product B trigger 2 days after completion of the form. And if they said they're interested in product C, they're going to receive a product C trigger 2 days after completion of the form. You can see that we are waiting a couple days to, again, not turn people off and seem too big brother-ish. Now, in each of these verticals, they're identical, but again, we're doing it based on what product interest they chose. So our next one that we're looking at is going to be a follow-up. The follow-up is going to contain another call to action, which is going to be another dialogue asking for a demo. This is going to go 7 days after they receive the initial trigger, which is the one with the star right here. So 7 days later, they receive this one. Complete the call to action, then they come down here and they receive a whole new trigger saying, thank you, somebody will be in touch. My next little line here is we're sending out another follow-up, and this one is 14 days from the date of the initial trigger. Okay? So 2 days after completing the form, they receive this one. 7 days later, they get this one. 7 more days later, they get a second follow-up. On this one, we'd probably be excluding anybody who had already completed the demo dialogue, but if they hadn't, we're giving them another opportunity to engage, and if they engage, they receive the trigger confirmation from this one. We're doing the same thing for product interest B. Here you can see that we have a call to action, demo dialogue. It's all related to product B, though. And then we have a follow-up for non-responders, again, containing a call to action to the demo dialogue. They complete either one of these, they get the demo dialogue confirmation. And same thing for product C. Follow-up 7 days later, follow-up number 2, 7 additional days later. This is a very easy example of how you can use nurtures to your advantage. Again, this is keeping your company, your message, your products in the forefront of somebody's mind, because you're constantly reaching out, you're trying to get them to engage, and eventually the hope is that they do engage. This whole campaign could be very easy to set up. You look at it here and you have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 initial campaigns, and then you have 2, 4, 6 follow-up campaigns. So if we were looking back at our trigger over here, let me go back into my trigger, we would have a total of 3 campaigns here because each one has to be an initial. So this one here would be, thank you for your interest in product A. Here's follow-up number 2 to product 1 to product A. Here's follow-up number 2 to product A. Then I'd have a whole new one with thank you for your interest in product B. Then I'd have a follow-up to product B, 1, follow-up 2 to product B, and then the same thing for C. We have a very easy copy function that is great for setups like that. If I click on here, and I get a list of all my triggers again, I can click on Copy All, and you'll see that it literally makes a replica of all of the triggers in the series. All I have to do is make some minor modifications, change the content, and tie it into the right action or event, and I'm good to go. So definitely take use of that Copy All function. Okay, that's all that I have today on nurturing campaigns using triggers. If you have any questions or concerns, we always have our toolbox, which is available here with our learning management with recorded videos, and we also have our help, which is a good online tutorial. It's a good reference, and it also has some quick starts. If you've never used trigger campaigns before, come in here and look at the quick start trigger campaigns. You can see that it walks you through step 1, step 2, step 3. It talks about the actions and events that release a trigger, and has some good information for you. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a great day.